If, in fact, we live in a godless universe and we are products of a Darwinian process, what is the basis for compassion?
One could give two different answers to that, really, I think, and both are possible. One is simply that we have evolved to have compassion, that we are empathetic beings, perhaps because we're social beings, and we do better by actually caring for each other. So because of that, we emotionally do care, and I think there's a lot of psychological evidence about that. But we could also argue, and I think this is the answer to Dinesh's claim that there can be no objective morality without God, we could also argue that it's because we're capable of reasoning, that we're capable of seeing that the interests of others are like our own. So I know that I suffer, and I know that I hate it, for example, if I am lying there in pain, sick, unable to help myself. And then I see someone else, right? I'm obviously, like the Good Samaritan here, if you like. I see someone else sick and in pain. So I think they must be suffering like I would. I would hate it if I were in that situation, and I can help them. I can give them some money, I've got plenty. I can take them to the inn or whatever it might be, and I can help them at little cost to myself. Why shouldn't I do that? I don't think you need to believe in God to take that view. I think you can simply take that view because we are rational beings capable of putting ourselves in the position of others.
Well, if there were a God, and if he had revealed his will about what is right or wrong in clear and indisputable language that we could all accept, then perhaps you could run this line. Then perhaps you could say, God did reveal to us what is right or wrong. But he did not do that. It's quite extraordinary how often religious people refer to some sacred text as if it were the source of all moral knowledge, and then ignore half, the inconvenient half, of course, of what it actually says. And we have plenty of examples of that in the Christian world today, including in this country. For we're living in a society in which most people, anyway, say that they are Christian. And yet, they ignore the repeated insistence of Jesus in the Gospels that everyone, and especially the rich, should give to the poor. You remember that bit of it? You remember when he told the rich man, sell all your possessions and give them to the poor? In case you didn't get the message, he went on to say, it's as hard for a rich man to go to heaven as a camel to go through the eye of a needle. That sounds like it's not a good policy to remain rich if you want to go to heaven, doesn't it? Yet there's lots of rich Christians still in this country. That's a bit of the gospel that they don't really seem to want to follow. And there's lots of other injunctions, for example, many of them in the same course. He urged those who give feasts to invite the poor, the maimed, the lame, and the blind. Most of you probably had a feast last Thursday. Hands up, those who invited the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind. Don't see a lot of hands. I see one or two hands. Very good. Congratulations. That's excellent. That's nice to see. But there's about 800 people in this room, and I saw a dozen or so hands, maybe. So I think that we are not actually getting our guidance. People, Christians generally, do not follow. They choose selectively which bits of the Bible they want to follow. Consider what Jesus is reported to have said about divorce. Divorce, he said, either is just wrong altogether, depending which bit of the Gospels you read, or it's only permitted on the grounds of adultery. There's not many Christians, there are some, but there's not many Christians who adhere to that. Even fewer adhere to the idea that to marry a divorced woman is itself to commit adultery. Don't know a lot of Christians who refuse to marry a divorced woman. Not a divorced man, apparently, by the way. Not too sure exactly what the basis of that distinction is. On the other hand, Christians in this country seem to think that they have a lot of guidance from God in Christianity about views about abortion, about the use of obtaining stem cells from embryos, about homosexuality. There's no clear guidance in the Gospels anyway, in the New Testament, about that. People may say, well, it's not just the New Testament, we go to the Old Testament as well. But once you go to the Old Testament, you find a lot of amazing things that God is supposed to have said and commanded, and your job of working out which ones you want to follow is more difficult than ever. For example, God explicitly advocates genocide in the Old Testament. Not passages probably very often read in church, but look at Numbers 31, where God commands the Israelites to wreak his vengeance on the Midianites. And when they go there and destroy their villages and kill their cattle and slaughter the men, they bring back to Moses the women and the children. And Moses is angry. Moses said, "Why have you spared the women and the children? Go and kill them. Go and kill all the women who have known men by lying with them, and kill all the boys. But the girls who haven't known men, keep them for yourselves." Is that where you want to take your moral guidance from? I don't think so. So the scriptures that we have are not guidance to moral thinking. If we want to use them, we have to use our own judgment. We have to sort out for ourselves what's right and wrong. And that's what we're doing anyway, whether we take the scriptures as a sacred text or just take them as an interesting work of literature to discuss and think about.
I want to address, though, the point that John made both in his opening remarks and again now, that Christianity is based on a historical fact, the resurrection of Jesus. The evidence for this historical fact is extremely slender. That's the problem with trying to rest on that. We don't have any contemporary documents that attest to this. We know from biblical criticism, new scholarship, that the actual so-called Gospels that we read were written considerably after this. They may have an earlier source, sometimes called Q, but that too was written at least a generation after this. So the idea of Jesus having been resurrected is something that was around in the literature that was written many years afterwards by Christians. But of course, we know that there are many diverse religious traditions that make all sorts of claims about historical facts, and the idea of a God who is resurrected, who comes back to life, is also not unique to Christianity. We find it in other anthropological traditions and in traditions around the time. We find, I think to rest much on this claim as a historical claim is extremely slender. And particularly since it does seem to violate all the laws of nature that we know and understand, we would need to have particularly strong evidence in order to believe in it. This is a point that the philosopher David Hume made, that to believe in miracles, you would need to have quite remarkably good evidence. In fact, Hume thought that you could never really have such evidence. I wouldn't say you could never have such evidence. I wouldn't say it's inconceivable that you could have events that were so well documented and witnessed that even though they appeared to go against all the laws of nature that we understand, nevertheless you would believe in them. But certainly the idea that Jesus rose again from the dead is not something that we could claim to be well known. In fact, I would say there are pretty much no facts about the life of Jesus that you could really take as being well known and well documented. But that would probably lead us too far. At least this central historical claim, I think, is something that you really have to be already a believer with faith to say, this is what I'm going to stake my belief on, despite the fact that there are so many other religious traditions that claim all sorts of incredible things.
It seems to me another powerful argument against any particular religion, including Christianity, including monotheism, is that if we look at the facts sociologically, we know that the probability of being a Christian, a believing Christian, is overwhelmingly greater if you were the child of Christian parents and/or grew up in a Christian society. And had you been the child of Muslim parents growing up in Saudi Arabia, it's overwhelmingly likely that you would have been a Muslim. And we can say the same about other religions. This, I think,
makes it more difficult to believe. Again, not impossible, but makes it more difficult to believe, to be confident of your belief in any particular religion. Because it seems that sociological factors have such a powerful influence rather than simply looking at the evidence and the argument and coming to the conclusion that one religion is true or the other.